Hej och välkomna allihopa till Apologia live. Vi har ju en förnäm gäst här som Mats snart ska presentera, men det känns ju väsentligt för mig att kunna visa att vi har 2 böcker av Koukl som vi har gett ut på svenska. Historien om verkligheten, som var den första boken av honom som vi gav ut. Det var inte den första han skrev. En mycket intressant bok som heter Hur världen började, hur den slutar och allt det viktiga som händer däremellan. Och sen har vi gett ut den boken som är hans mest kända bok och som ofta hamnar på topplistorna över de mest intressanta böckerna kring kommunikation och kristen tro, nämligen Taktik, Vinnande taktik, en strategi för att samtala om den kristna tron. Och det är det som är temat för ikväll. Så Mats, jag lämnar över till dig för att introducera kvällen och talaren och ta över det här mötet. Varsågod.
Tack för det, Stefan. Och jag switchar väl över på engelska då. Greg, are you with us?
There I am, sir. Nice to see you, Mats.
But your ministry is something special, brother, isn't it? Because you're not focusing on the content. Of course, there's a lot of content.
Right.
You're focusing on the how issue. How should we present this? How should we win? You're talking about apologetics as the art of apologetics, not just the content of it.
Yeah, there's a substance to it, obviously, and this is what we studied when we worked on our master's in philosophy, and then subsequent studies that we do when we go to websites, we read books, we get the stuff, okay? The question is, how do you get all that good information wherever you get it from? And you know, our field of apologetics, the ability to answer the challenges that skeptics raise, and also to make a positive case for Christianity, is so rich. We have, to use, and again, here I'm going to fall onto Americanisms here, and you can help me translate, but we have a very deep bench, all right? There's, we have so many people that have answered so many of the questions, but the issue is not the information. The issue is, how do you get the information into play in a conversation? And see, this is where I think we haven't done well in providing a bridge from the content to the conversation, or from the scholarship to the relationship, so to speak.
I think so too, and that makes the book unique. It's kind of sad to say because we should have had much more of those books, but we're happy we're having this one. And I just finished it, and honestly, I was crying in the end. I'm such a sensitive guy.
Yes, you're a sentimentalist there.
But I did cry when you talked about Christ, and you talked about taking the roof off and reaching the existential need. I was just touched by it. It was very
I think, thank you for bringing that up. I mean, it's sweet that you said you were crying, and I'm touched by that, actually. I'm not actually weeping yet, but I am touched by what you said, Mats. But I think this point about the existential issue is really critical, especially in Europe, okay? And I don't mean existentialism, continental existentialism. I mean, that's a response to the God is dead approach. Okay, what do you got? You got nothing but yourself and your own decisions. But we know that there's more than that. Something inside of the human being is crying out to discover the meaning that we intuitively know exists. All right. And when people say life is meaningless, this makes no sense to us. We know better. And why some of the existentialists just decide to kill themselves, when they realized, in their own mind at least, that there's nothing more. We know better. And actually, in the latest edition of Tactics, which I don't know if it's out in Swedish or not, it came out 2 years ago, the 10th anniversary edition.
That's the one.
That's the one. Okay,
yes.
Good. I'm very glad to hear that, because there's a chapter on a tactic called Inside Out.
Yes.
And the whole idea is that God has already built inside of every human being certain things that we can trade on, and that is this existential longing to discover the meaning of life and to find our Creator, to be in relationship and friendship with Him. And this existential longing is something that especially I think Europeans can trade on.
Yeah.
Because there's so many other obstacles. But as I say in the end of that chapter, people can run from God, but they cannot run from themselves. And this is what that tactic trades on.
What I like, though, is, I like a lot of stuff in the book, but I like it right from the start, because you talk about this Columbo guy, and I saw him as a kid. As a kid, he was on TV in Sweden, but many younger people haven't probably never heard of him. Can you try to imitate him a little bit?
Well, I can't I can't put my trench coat on here and get my cigar out, though I got a box of cigars over here and my trench coat's in the closet. But it doesn't work so well here as it does on a stage. But the point is, this is a TV character going back half a century in American TV, and he's the number one TV icon of all time. He's so recognizable and memorable. And what people liked about him is he was a detective that solved murder mysteries. And of course, at the beginning of the murder, you know who commits it. And so the deal is, how does Lieutenant Columbo figure it out? Well, he comes into the crime scene. He's wearing this old trench coat. Looks like he slept in it, you know. He's got a tussle of hair, you know, and he's got this cigar in his hand, and he's got a pad of paper that he can't use because he doesn't have a pen or pencil. He's got to bum a pencil off of somebody, and I mean, this guy looks stupid, right? But he's stupid like a fox, all right? And that is, he has a specific method, and he'll be scratching his head like he's confused, and he'll say something like, I don't know, there's something about this thing that bothers me, you know. And then, do you mind if I ask you a question? Now, my imitation works better with the jacket and the cigar, because it's actually not that good, but the illusion is more complete. But the point is he starts to probe with questions. And as he's probing with questions, he's gathering some basic information he needs. But as you follow through, and this is what's so much fun about him, he's still kind of scratching his head, but you know that his questions are working in a different fashion. His questions are to expose the bad guy, you know, expose the murderer, and just, you know, find the information and show the discrepancies and the contradictions in what the person is saying, who thinks he's totally safe. Okay, now think for a moment about, let's just say, atheists in Europe. I mean, this is probably the most confident group of people you'll run into. They're total materialists, and they just, of course, you know, kind of attitude. And even some of the American atheists have coined the term brights to describe atheists. Like, we're the smart people, the non-atheists are really dumb. So notice the confidence, all right? And our temptation is to kind of go head-to-head with these people, you know? Sometimes we can't, because we're not up to it. We're not clever like they are in some cases. We're not as bright as they are. We're not as fast on our feet or whatever. That's not Columbo's method. You go head-to-head with the person he thinks is the criminal, and that's going to scare him away, right? So he comes in kind of quietly and mildly and meekly and starts probing with these questions. And as he's getting answers, he is building his case, not because he is putting all of the pieces on the table, but because he's getting the other person to put the pieces on the table. Now, I've noticed this a bit, and I actually expanded on this in the new version, so I'm glad you have this. But you can actually, using the Columbo method, which is the basic game plan here, there are other tactics that help us, but Columbo is the game plan. You can actually get the person who you disagree with to help you make your case. You can enlist them as an ally. And because if you start making your case, oh, well, here's the deal, boom, 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 and you're making your case for God, say, against an atheist. You start with this, then you go to this, and to this, and so you build your case and come to your conclusion. A lot of your atheists aren't going to let you walk that path, because the minute you try to put one piece on the table, they're going to gainsay it. They're going to disagree. They're going to argue with you. You know, they're not going to give you anything, all right? So instead of doing it that way, we can use a question. And the question then is meant to elicit a response where the atheist affirms something obvious that is a piece of your argument, but he doesn't know where you're going with it. And so you get him, it's not a trap. It's just it's to avoid their defensiveness and get them to agree with the obvious things you're putting on the table that then lead to the conclusion, in this case, that God exists. So I do explain that more in the book, in the 10th anniversary edition especially, but this is part of the value of using questions in very particular ways to maneuver in conversations. It's one of the strengths. There's a number of other strengths, but this idea of enlisting the person you disagree with, I don't want to say opponent, because I don't want to make it that kind of an environment, but the person you disagree with, your friend, whoever, relative, whoever, you want to enlist them as a helper or as an ally in making your case. And so using questions allows you to do that.
And you come back to that all the time, basically, in the book. Ask questions, ask questions. Well, why is asking questions so important?
Okay, that's a fabulous question. And there you go. Okay, I want to make an observation just about our interview. Okay, you're sitting there relaxed, enjoying yourself, and Mr. Koukl is doing all the work. Okay, but the conversation is going in the direction that you want it to go. How is it that I'm doing the work, but you're in charge of the conversation? Or to use a euphemism, you're in the driver's seat, all right? It's because you're using questions. And see, this is the chief value of question. I mean, there are other values that are really big, but the point of the tactical game plan is not to manipulate people. It's for you to be in the driver's seat to try to productively take the conversation where you think is best. Okay? Now, I know you have a set of questions for our interview. I mean, good interviewers set themselves up like that. Okay? And so you know where you want to go. You know where we want to be in an hour, say, or whatever. And so you're using your questions to guide the interview, even though I'm doing most of the talking. I'm doing the heavy lifting, so to speak. So this is the value. Much of the time when Christians are in conversations with non-Christians, it's a hostile environment. It's combative, okay? Each of us are saying the other person's wrong and they're right, okay? Well, that isn't the way to get people thinking about their own views. It certainly isn't the best way to persuade. A better way is to have a conversation. And this frightens Christians because they think, well, what if I try to get in a conversation with somebody who knows more than I do? Excuse me. Or maybe outmaneuvers me or whatever. And I can't answer all the questions, or I can't make the case. And so they get frightened because they don't know what to do, or they might get caught. And so they sit on the bench and don't engage at all. However, if you're simply asking questions, now remember, we have a point to the questions, but if you're simply doing that, you're not making any claims. And if you're not making any claims, you don't have anything to defend. And this is something that a lot of more aggressive types don't understand. They think, well, if you're not making your claims, Christianity is true and Jesus rose from the dead and God exists and all that, and here's why, then how are you going to make progress in the conversation? And what I tell my audiences, and I'm telling to your viewers, Mats, is trust me on this. Trust me on this. When you start asking questions in the right way, and I teach you how to do that in the book, you are going to force the other person to think more carefully about their own views, what their views are, and why they believe them. That's the first few steps. And I promise you, it's going to make a difference. And let me give you a quick illustration here. There is an American atheist who wrote a book on tactics for atheists. His name is Peter Boghossian, and his book is called The Manual for Creating Atheists. It's interesting what he tells his atheist disciples to do and not to do when talking to theists, including Christians. He says, don't argue against their religion. 1. 2, don't argue for atheism. Really? How are you going to get Christians to leave their religion and become atheists? Ask questions, and specifically here for Boghossian, about faith. He thinks faith, the way he describes it or mischaracterizes it, misdefines it, is the Achilles heel for Christians. And the way he defines it, it is an Achilles heel, but it's manipulative. It's not an accurate biblical definition. Nevertheless, he is very effective training his people to effectively make a dent in the Christian population simply by asking questions, because the questions, the way they ask them, create doubt in the mind of the Christian. And the Christian may not convert in that moment, but I have seen videos where you have a conversation between the atheist and the Christian, and then 3 months later, that Christian, who never gave on that he was being influenced by the atheist, is sending a video back to the atheist saying, "Thank you for helping me see the light and become an atheist based on what you said." I've seen the videos. Now, notice what is going on there. Okay, it is a tactical method using questions that doesn't immediately convert the person, but it does this, and this is a concept I develop in the book. Very simple. It puts a stone in their shoe. All right? Now, everybody listen.
We have that expression.
Good. Okay, super. Well, that's because everybody gets a stone in their shoe sooner or later. And it's not the end of the world, but it is a little annoying, right? You've got to pay attention to it. And in the same way, when we ask questions, just like the atheists do of Christians, when we ask the right kinds of questions of them, okay, that and not just atheists, but a whole range of people that have a variety of beliefs different than Christianity, we ask questions appropriate to their circumstances. They may not let on right away. They may be, not interested or appearing not to listen. But you never know what the Holy Spirit is doing. And I do know, atheists don't have the Holy Spirit, and the method works for them. So it works even without the Holy Spirit, okay? Just because of the way the mind works. You ask questions about a person's convictions. They don't want to let on that they don't know the answer or this bothers them, but it still will stick at them like a stone in their shoe. And so this is the goal that I have for my conversations. And it's quite, controversial with some people, but I'll especially the more aggressive type Christians. But I'll just put it this way. I never have it as a goal to, when I get in a spiritual conversation, or a conversation I hope will have a spiritual impact, I never have it as a goal to lead that person to Christ in that moment. Okay? In fact, I don't even have as a goal to get to the gospel. Now, this freaks people out who are Christians. They think, don't you care that he want to become? Of course I want him to become. Doesn't it require the gospel? Of course it requires the gospel. But think about it. Jesus didn't get to the gospel in every conversation. You look at the life of Jesus, and he caused people all kinds of trouble with the questions he asked and the things that he said that were counterintuitive to their religion. All right. And largely to put the burden of the law, I think, on people's hearts so that they would appreciate the grace that he was to offer. And so, but this is the kind of thing that we can do too, that we can, you might even call it pre-evangelism. This is what the late Dr. Francis Schaeffer used to call it, but I call it gardening. Okay, I just call it gardening, and when we go out just to do a little bit, and we have a game plan that allows us to do that, we are relaxed. The pressure's not on us, and we're getting information that helps us. And by God's grace, and by our maneuvering, being wise and shrewd, as Jesus said, hopefully we're getting the other person thinking in a productive way about what the truth actually is.
And Jesus's questions are sometimes very surgical. I mean, they hit right in the personal nerve in that person, And since we're not all knowing, or we don't have that prophetic knowledge, most of us, we just have to ask questions in order to hone in. Where does this person, where is he or she in the landscape, right? Yes,
I mean, Jesus did have that supernatural insight, but you don't need that because you can read human beings lots of times. Yeah. And even the questions that are part of the game plan are the appropriate questions to get them thinking if we use them in a creative way. Now, some people use there's 3 steps to the game plan, and the first 2 are the most important for beginners. Okay, the third step is a little advanced. And actually writing another book right now, that adds to the tactics book. It's called Street Smarts, and it's meant to expand on the third step. But the first two steps are very simple, and they involve model questions. But I think people, when they first read the book, they don't realize how flexible those model questions happen to be. You don't have to say them woodenly exactly, but they can be inserted in different ways in the conversation to accomplish the goal that you have for them.
And tell us those questions so people that are not familiar with your book.
Yes, okay. So, let me give you a sketch of the game plan. And this is the basic I call it the Columbo Two-Step, okay? Sounds like a dance. So sorry about the Baptists out there, but never... they didn't like the cigar reference either. So anyway, the first step of the game plan is, in a certain sense, counterintuitive to a lot of people. All right, because what people who enter into conversations on a spiritual matter, they're thinking about the end game, and the end game is leading a person to Christ, and this is what we want for everybody, to become Christians and then to grow in Christ. All right, but what I want to tell them right now is not to think about that. You're thinking about a harvest, and most people are not ready to harvest, and frankly. If you think about harvesting in agriculture, when the harvest is ready, it's easy. The fruit drops into the basket. You touch it and it falls off the vine. So harvesting is not hard. It's the gardening where the work is at. Okay? Or as Jesus put it, the sowing and reaping in John chapter 4. Okay? And so what we want to think about now is sowing or gardening. Okay, we're just going to go out, and gardening includes a lot of different things, hoeing and digging and pulling weeds and watering and planting and stuff like that. So there are different aspects of it. I don't want anybody to think about harvesting. Forget about that. It's going to be distractive nuisance at this point. So instead, I want them to think about, first step, gathering information. That's all I want them to think about. You cannot know where to go in a controversial conversation with a stranger, or maybe not a stranger. It could be a family member or a friend, but their spiritual views are not clear to you, or you may not be aware of them, or you've never let them have an opportunity to explain them fully. All right? Why should we let them explain it? It's all false. We got to tell them the truth. They don't know it's false, probably. And one way to get them to realize it's false is to get them to talk about their view more with more questions asking for clarification. So we are going to have a first step commitment to just gathering information. And by the way, we may never get off that first step, all right, in a conversation. Why would I say that? Because I don't know what information I'm going to get. The information I might get is, hey, I'm not even interested in talking to you, go away. Well, I'm not going to bother that person, all right? The information I get may be, hey, I'm a Christian too. Oh, well, then they know the Lord. For example, or I'm not a Christian, I was a Christian, and I never want to talk to another Christian again. Okay, see, these are all different kinds of information. Now, what you might also find out is, well, I'm not a Christian, I'm an atheist. Oh, okay. Okay, now I've got some information. I know generally where they're coming from, but I don't want to just leave it at that as if I'm assuming I know what this atheist believes about a whole host of things. I know that an atheist denies God's existence, or at least denies the existence of a certain kind of God, but I don't know what kind of God that atheist rejects. So I might just ask, let me back up. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. So notice that this first step is to gather information, and I'm going to use some form of the question. And here's your model question. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Now, that's the model question. You might just say, tell me about it. That's a what do you mean by that question. Or you might say, what kind of atheist are you? Lots of different kind of atheists. Some are materialists, some are not materialists. Some are moral objectivists. Some are not moral objectivists, you know. Some don't believe in in some personal God. They're an atheist regarding a personal God, but they might believe in a spiritual realm, you know. And so these are all different kinds of beliefs. And I bet you if you ask the question, of an atheist, what kind of atheist are you? Many of them are going to look at you like they don't know what you're talking about when the question is really simple. Here's why. They have never thought about their atheism. They have absorbed atheism from their culture. They know atheism means there's no God, so there's no one looking over their shoulder, and they can do whatever they want that they can get away with. Okay? And by the way, this is, I think, a cogent point regarding atheism in Europe, because you have a long history of that, not like in the United States. You have a long history of despots who did not believe in God, or had some radically, for all intents and purposes, did not, like the Third Reich. But you have the Soviet system and all of that, Iron Curtain. And because there's no God, they did what they wanted. And largely the history, if they still teach that to kids in Europe, they don't do that much anymore in the States. But when God is out of the picture, people do what they want. So your average atheist thinks there's no God, I can do what I want, as long as I can get away with it, But they haven't thought any more about atheism. And about the impact as a worldview, the ramifications on morality, on meaning, on significance, on value, on the future, on the past, all these different things. Okay, they don't think about that. And see, this is what we can help them to do, because I think in every single one of those areas, they have serious problems with their worldview. Yeah. So I probably talked too much about that as atheism, but I'm just using that as a general illustration of the first step in a conversation is just to gather information. Now, keep this in mind. If you're asking people about their own views, that's not confrontational. You're showing an interest in them. Exactly. That's good manners. And who's doing most of the talking? Not you, the other person. What are you doing as a Christian? You're paying attention. You're listening. And this will become more evident as the Christians get more used to this game plan. You're going to hear all kinds of things that you are going to be able to take advantage of in a good way regarding the truth. You're going to be, so let's just say, for example, you're listening to your atheist. You say, what kind of atheist are you? Well, I don't know. What do you mean? Well, do you think there's only the physical world and nothing in the non-physical? There's no non-physical world? Materialism. This is your standard atheist as a materialist. Yeah, it's all science tells you what's true. Just the physical world, that's all there is. Oh, okay. So you've never complained about the problem of evil. Yes, I have. I can't believe in God because of the problem of evil. Well, wait a minute. That confuses me a little bit. Why does that confuse you? Well, you said you're materialist, right? Yeah. Well, moral obligations, moral rules, are those physical? No. Well, then moral rules don't exist, on your view, if I'm understanding you correctly. I guess not. Well, if there are no moral rules, how could there be a problem of evil? Okay, now do you notice that what I've done here, I just role-played a little conversation, and I've actually done two things here. First, I've gathered some information and become clear on something, and then I exploit, and this is the third step of Columbo. I just give you an illustration. Don't worry about that right now. But I'm able, because I know the problem with atheistic materialism is there can't be a problem of evil. It's impossible, okay, because there's no morality in that worldview. Now I'm going to sneak up on him. Well, did you ever complain about the problem of evil? All atheists complain about the problem of evil. But evil makes no sense in your worldview. So how could you be But they never thought about that. And so I ask them about that, and then they get stuck. Oh, so what we're doing with our questions is we are helping the atheist to understand their view better, as well as helping us to understand the atheist better, okay? So there's an example of using questions largely to draw people out. I had a gal call me on my own radio show the other day. She said, I just used task the first time, and it was fabulous. It was incredible. She told me the illustration. And she had talked to a young lady, and the young lady said, I used to be a Christian. I'm not a Christian. I don't want anything to do with that. Okay? Hostility, right? So the gal says, tell me about it. All right, now you can see now, your viewers know this is a kind thing to do. She's not defensive as a Christian. Tell me about. She's opening her heart, all right? But that's just a version of what do you mean by that. And when the other person is talking, now the Christian has a more clear sense of exactly what happened to that person that makes that person oppose Christianity. So you see how you're getting valuable intel with the very first question, in which you're not worried about the end game. You're just engaging in a friendly way, asking appropriate questions, and two things are happening, maybe three. First thing is you're being friendly. That's nice. You're showing an interest. That's good manners. Second thing, you're getting valuable information about their own view and helping them to think more carefully about their own view. And third, you might discover something they say that is a weakness or a flaw that you can use another question to expose. That's Columbo number 3. All right. So we jumped over a step, but I want people to see the strength of the first step because, look, if your viewers say, hey, this looks interesting to me, I'm willing to try it, my recommendation is just start with the first step. And for the next month, simply have a goal to be a student of other people's views. That's all. You're just going to get clear on that. And I've had people say, what if they ask me about my own views? Just beg off. Just say, oh, you know what, to be honest with you, I don't want to talk about my views right now, if that's all right with you. I'm just interested in your views. So we are asking for their views, and then the second step of the game plan is very, very simple, okay, when you think about it. Once the person gives their view and we understand their view, then in the second step, we want to understand why they hold the view they hold. Okay, why do you hold the view you hold? All right, and that's a burden of proof issue, and many people are familiar with that. But if a person says something is so, that's controversial. There is no God. Well, that person has some obligation to give a reason why they think their view is true. And so it's entirely appropriate to ask, oh, okay, I get that. We've talked a little bit. I understand what you're after here. Tell me, how did you come to that particular conclusion? Okay, that's our second question. How did you come to that conclusion? Or why do you think there is no God? What are your reasons for that? Now, it's an entirely appropriate question to ask, however you do it. There's flexibility. But now you're going to force the atheist to think of the specific reasons why there is no God in his mind. And a lot of them aren't going to be able to do that. Now, they might say, well, I've never seen any good reason for God. Now, this is crazy for me as an apologist because there's so many powerful arguments for God. And so I'm going to say, oh, okay, what books have you read? What arguments have you considered for God that you've rejected? Now, that's a what do you mean by that question, right? Now, what are they going to say? I bet you most of your atheist friends are I never heard an argument for God. Okay, well then why would you think there's no good ones if you never heard one? That's a clarification question. Notice what am I doing? I'm just simply in a friendly way pushing the conversation back on the individual with appropriate questions to get clear on their own view. All right? Now there's much more to the game plan and the other tactics, but this is the beginning. This is the starting point.
And in my mind, I think we'll see if you agree with me, but now we're focusing a lot on the first steps. On the other hand, though, if every Christian in the UK, in the US, or in Sweden, if every Christian started to ask these two questions to teachers, to friends, whatever, whatnot, more than 50% on the work would have been done. I mean, when it comes to evangelism, we would be so effective, I think.
Yes.
Because we would be those inquisitive people asking questions all the time, learning stuff, asking more questions, asking more, putting the burden of proof in their lap over and over and over again.
Right.
By the way, you talk about the burden of proof, which is one of my favorite concepts.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, isn't that right? That this question thing is,
yes,
is very much the key, and it's very easy to jump over it. As a philosopher, apologist, I like all the other concepts. This is too simple, but that would be a mistake.
No, I think this is a great approach because remember, just for you know this, but for the audience sake, burden of proof is on the shoulder of the person who makes the controversial claim. Okay, so in American jurisprudence, and this is characteristic of the West, if you are charged with a crime, well, that's a controversial claim. The burden of proof is on the person who made the charge. You're innocent until proven guilty. And so the same concept's in play here. If the atheist says, well, there's no God, oh, that's controversial. That's a powerful claim. That has a lot of ramifications. Okay, well, he must have some reasons. So I'm curious what those reasons are. All right. Now, if the Christian says there is a God, guess what? Burden of proof is on the Christian. But in our game plan so far, and generally speaking, we are not making claims. We are trying to make our point by asking questions. And like you said, if everybody would do this, 50% of the job would be done. Actually, more than that, and I'll tell you why. It's because of how many Christians are sitting on the bench and they are not in play because they were afraid. And by the way, I'm completely sympathetic to that. In fact, the first words of my new book, I'm still working on the introductory material right now, are something like, evangelism is not my favorite thing, It's just not, and some people really like it, but it's not what and I don't think I'm alone. And the reason is because people are afraid. Why are they afraid? Because they have no plan. If they had a plan, and if they had some of the answers, it's like going to a test. I ask the audience, how many people like taking tests? Nobody raises their hand. And I say, how many people don't mind taking tests if you know the answers? Boom, all the hands go up. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about here. We want to get people off the bench. I do. I want them to get them in the garden so they do more gardening. If you do more gardening, you're going to have a greater harvest. All right? And when you're gardening, there's a whole bunch of people out there gardening with you. You're out there, Mats. I'm out there. Stefan is out there. And all these listeners. We're a team. Jesus said it this way. He in John chapter 4, he said, you are about to reap. He told the disciples there after he talked with the woman at the well. You are about to reap where you did not sow. So in this one statement, he's identifying one field, which was Sychar in that case, the village, and one team, the body. He said, but 2 seasons, a sowing and a reaping season, or as I say, gardening and a harvesting season, and 2 kinds of workers, sowers and reapers, gardeners and harvesters. And I learned a long time ago, Mats, that I was not really a harvester. I was a sower. I was a gardener. And so I began to think about how I can garden more effectively. Now, I'll tell you one other thing that surprises a lot of people when I say this, is I have not prayed with someone to receive Christ in over 30 years. Yeah, what a loser, right? Yeah, that's what people are thinking right now. But I'll tell you something. My life has not been more productive as it has been in the last 30 years for the cause of Christ. But you probably know, and maybe some of your listeners know, of a guy named J. Warner Wallace. Is his name familiar to you? Cold Case Christianity, okay. He's a sensation because he used to be an atheistic cop who solved murders. Cold case murders that were dead cold for 25 years. And he never lost a case that went to trial. He's really good, all right? And what he decided to do is to use his detective skills, which are substantial, on Christianity, and specifically the Gospels as purported eyewitness testimony. And he was convinced the Gospels were reliable. He became a Christian. Then he became a Christian apologist. Then he became a Christian writer. And he's a best-selling author now, for example, with the book Cold Case Christianity, okay? J. Warner Wallace, okay? Jim Wallace was in my garden when he was an atheist.
Oh, yeah.
J. Warner Wallace was listening to our radio show at Stand to Reason when he was still an atheist, okay? Now, I didn't lead him to Christ. Somebody else led him to Christ. And frankly, I had to ask him, how did that happen? I don't know, because we're very good friends now. And but he didn't matter. There was other members on the team. And you know who Abdu Murray is, Saving Truth. He wrote the book, A Muslim Who Became a Christian, then became a Christian apologist. And Abdu was in my garden also. He was listening to my show when he was still a Muslim. Okay. Now, I'm not trying to brag or anything. What I'm trying to do is to demonstrate a dynamic that when you're gardening, you're just doing part of the job. There are other team players. When the harvest is ready, it's going to fall in the basket. You may not be there. So what? Jesus says, so that the one who sows and the one who reaps can rejoice together.
Oh, yeah.
That's my attitude. So I think most Christians are gardeners, and what I do with the tactics book is to give them a tool to garden. Most Christians don't have a tool like that, all right? They don't know how to proceed in a conversation. This tool gives them a step-by-step means of doing that without getting in trouble, okay? The way I like to put it is they get in the shallow end of the pool, right? They're not in the deep end. They're not going to drown. They're ankle deep. That's it. But they participate in a productive way using the game plan. Now, you can get in the deep end when you want to. Lars, you probably paddle around in the deep end all the time because you know a few things. However, there's a lot of Christians on the bench that aren't going to do that. If I can give them a technique, a game plan that allows them to engage in a productive way with taking no risk on themselves, I think more people are going to do it, and that's what I've seen.
That's beautiful. You have a lot of tactics. I mean, this is the basics, and I think rightfully so. You have emphasized it, and I want you to emphasize it like that. But would you share a little bit? You do it in the book, very humbly, I would say. You share a little bit about pitfalls as well. Yeah. Are there any pitfalls that you would try to warn us for?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mats. One pitfall is for the more aggressive types to use the tactical game plan and the other tactics in order to corner and embarrass the non-Christian, all right? And this is not the spirit of the tactics book. The reason that I mention this is because the tactics are powerful. All right. Think back on the conversation I role-played with the atheist who complains about the problem of evil. You know, it would be easy, I think, to go through a conversation like that, kind of trying to let the atheist see like he's an idiot. You're an idiot, right? Because you think there's no morality, and you're complaining about the problem of evil. Are you kidding me? You know, so there's a way that these tactics and the game plan can be played out that's abusive. But again, that's not my project. And so I want people to be careful of that. Incidentally, when you do it that way, you're not going to be as effective either. So there's a moral element, an ethical element. Be virtuous in the use of these, but also keep in mind that when you're virtuous, you're more effective as well. So there's a pragmatic element as well. That's one liability. There's another one, but go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to ask one last question before I will let people ask their questions in the chat. One thing I was struck about what you wrote about anger. You said if anyone gets angry, you lose. If you get angry, you lose. If the other person gets angry, you lose. And
that's right.
I totally buy that as a general idea. I'm just curious how you would respond to this question. What about John the Baptist and all the prophets and Jesus? I mean, people got very upset.
Sure. That's right. Notice I'm speaking pragmatically here.
Yeah.
If I let my frustration, anger get the best of me, I am not going to be persuasive. Also, I am not being virtuous in the circumstance, but I'm not responsible for the virtue of another person. Okay. If my manner of communicating or my message makes the other person angry, then they are not going to be in a mood to be persuaded. That doesn't mean they're not going to be angry. And as you pointed out, look, Jesus got himself killed, for goodness sake, and he was perfect. Yeah. He did it perfectly, right? So you cannot control what the other person does. Now, you can keep from pushing their buttons illegitimately, okay? So if you're interrupting all the time, that's called steamroller, and there are people who interrupt us, so there's a tactic on dealing with an interrupter, but don't you be a steamroller. Steamrollers are the ones that tempt my anger more than any others. And A steamroller is somebody keeps interrupting you.
I would just say, yeah, ångvält in Swedish.
Oh, okay. Oh, thank you for that help. Yeah. And so when they keep rolling over the top of you, then I get really mad. Okay. Now, if I'm mad, I'm not going to be persuasive, right? So I got to control. However, if what I say makes the other person mad, and it's the content, not my style, that makes them angry, well, then that's their problem. All right. If the way I'm talking makes them angry, shame on me. If it's the content of what I'm saying that makes them angry, shame on them. All right. Now, John the Baptist, he was a pretty harsh character. All right. He was a prophet, and the whole deal. Everybody knows about John the Baptist, but and he stood for what was true, and he wasn't afraid to confront, as people say now in the States, speaking truth to power. All right. He spoke truth to power, and he paid a price for it. You're not going to be able to avoid paying a price for that. Look at Europe, especially. I mean, it's got a long history, thousands of years, of Christians speaking out for the truth and paying a terrible price for it. Whether you're talking about, the earliest martyrs, or you're talking about Dietrich Bonhoeffer or others, maybe some might not think of him in the same category, but the point is those who have stood for the truth, and it cost them something, reformers, for example. Yeah. And so we just have to, when we do that, we're not persuading people, but that's because of them. What we are doing is being faithful to the message, and we are paying the price that faithfulness requires in that circumstance.
And you might persuade the onlookers, the people, the audience that looks, as you said, when you have a debate, you might be a little harsher because you're not speaking to the guy you're debating, you're speaking to the audience. And
that's right. That's a very good point, Mats. The audience, especially in a debate, I am not trying to persuade Michael Shermer, American atheist, for example, that I debated, or Deepak Chopra, who is a New Age guru, and I did a 1-hour TV debate with him. No, I'm trying to persuade people who are listening. Yeah. All right. When you're debating a famous person, they've already sold millions of books. They're probably not going to change their mind. All right. But the people that are listening are the ones many times that are on the fence, and that's your actual audience. You're right about that.
Well, it's interesting. Thank you so much, Greg. We will let people ask their questions now, and
let's go down to the question. The first Columbo question is great. When people talk about their worldview or criticize a Christian worldview, but how can we have good conversations when no one's saying anything about faith and people simply do not seem to care? All right. People don't seem to care about Christianity, especially in Europe. Got it. All right. But they care about a whole bunch of other things. They care about things that have worldview ramifications. Okay. So, I mean, we've got COVID. All right. So we got to do all this stuff for public health. All right. Now, let me just presume that most people who are watching, their friends are going to be atheists. My sense is the vast majority of people in Europe are just materialistic atheist types, and God's not in their, on the radar at all. Okay, but there's a bunch of stuff on the radar. Okay, so okay, COVID. All these ideas about what we should do about COVID. I'm not going to get into the details, but notice that there is a concern about what we ought to do. Ought to do. That's a moral term. What we're morally obliged to do to protect other people. Okay, so this raises a question. Well, that's a bad policy. We ought to be protecting other people, and everybody's got to stay at home. But the question is a worldview question. So, wait a minute. You're an atheist, right? Yeah. Well, why do we have an obligation under atheism to protect other people? No, I'm waiting for an answer. I don't know what they're going to say. They might say, well, it's self-serving because if we protect other people from COVID, then it protects me too. All right, that would be a self-serving, pragmatic answer. But anytime the atheist is going to suggest, even subtly, that we have moral obligations to each other, you can't silence atheists. Atheists should have a right to speak. Wait. I'm confused about this right word. You said right. What is a right? You say right, that means I have an obligation to honor whatever you say your right is. Well, but you're an atheist. Yeah, of course. Well, how could I have a moral obligation then on your view? Okay, so I just use that as an example to point out that people care about lots of stuff that have worldview ramifications, that if you understand the connectedness between worldviews and the things that are entailed by them, there's a nice heavy-duty philosophical word that you and I could use because we paid all that money to be able to say those words, but that are when I say entailed, I mean that are part of that system. If you say there is no God, one thing that follows is that there's no morality, no objective morality. Yeah. All right?
It's baked into it.
Yes, right. And so when you see these connections a little bit, you begin to ask questions about that. And then, see where people say. And what we want them to do is we want them to feel the pain of the logical conclusions that atheism leads to. This is called taking the roof off. That's the name of that tactic. We let the cold wind blow, okay, and let them feel the difficulty. Yeah. What's the next question on your list there under Tobias's question?
Yeah, then it's Thomas and Mia. I think many atheists are atheists because they dislike something within Christianity rather than actually being converted full-blooded atheists. What questions would you use talking to people similar as described?
Okay, I think your questioner is absolutely correct in that. And many well-known atheists, academics in this country have been very straightforward about what it is they don't like. They don't like the sexual standards of Christianity. They want to sleep with whoever they want. They want to do whatever kind of sex they want without any God looking over their shoulder. This isn't my judgment from the sidelines. This is what many of them say, and it's my suspicion that it is what drives a whole lot of people with regards to atheism. Okay? In a broader sense, they want to be their own God. They don't want anyone telling them what to do. I wasn't an atheist when I was a non-Christian in college, but I hadn't really refined my thinking on that, but I certainly was somebody who didn't want anybody telling me what to do. This is why I was a moral relativist. There's no objective morality. Now, that's a silly thing to say for a lot of reasons, but nevertheless, I said it. And ironically, I was marching against the war in Vietnam at the time because I thought the war was immoral. Well, that doesn't make any sense. But nevertheless, I was aware at the time of the conflict, but also the payoff for me. Because if morals are relative, then no one can claim that I shouldn't be doing something because it was wrong. And I was thinking largely in sexual terms then, as many young men college age do. And after that, old men as well. So I think that is a driving force there, okay? Now, how do you get to that? And then I think the simple question is, the second Columbo question, how did you come to that conclusion? Okay, so you're an atheist, but why are you an atheist? And then see what they say. They might just say, well, I don't like some of these things about Christianity. Okay, so I'm going to try to role play how I might question at this point. So I just want to be clear on something, though. So you're not saying that Christianity is false. You're saying you don't like it. Is that what you're saying? What do you mean?
Is that wishful thinking?
It might be. I don't know what they're going to answer. Okay, so if Christianity were actually true, and the moral standards of sexuality applied, or whatever it is that bother you, then you would still be under that standard, wouldn't you? Well, I guess so, if it were true, but it's not true. Oh, okay, well, that's the question then, whether it's true or not. So why do you think Christianity is false? Well, because I don't like the standards. Oh, no, we're going backwards again now. We just talked about that. Of course you don't like it. Guess what? I don't like them either some of the time. All right? We're not talking about what we like. You're an atheist, right? Yeah. You care about truth, right? Yeah. So what matters is whether Christianity is true or not. Right? Well, yeah. Okay, so tell me why you think it's false. Don't tell me why you think you don't like it. Notice how I'm guiding the conversation on the thing that matters. the truth of Christianity. I'm in the driver's seat, and I'm using my questions to do it.
That's great. That's great. Johannes asks, sometimes atheists I talk to hold the view that the more existential questions are unanswerable. So when I ask them questions about, for example, what their ground for morality or meaning is, they simply deny that the question can be answered. How could you go about in that situation?
What the atheist, I understand the question, but what the atheist has done here is simply presumed the truth of atheism against their native or natural intuitions. Okay. Now, I want to, just to clarify, as philosophers, we know intuition is a way of knowing something. It isn't just a hunch you have about something. It is it's a deep internal source of knowledge, okay? So if I said A equals B and B equals C, you know A equals C. Well, that's a rational intuition. It's built in, okay? And I don't have to make an argument for it. It's there. Well, there are lots of types of awarenesses that we have that seem to be entirely true about the nature of the world. And this is what I talk about in that chapter called Inside Out. And one of the awarenesses that we have is that human life is meaningful. It's meaningful. And so I would ask this question, for example, of someone who denied objective meaning. And that's the existential issue, right? No objective meaning, just private, personal meaning, okay? I said, would you ever try to talk a person out of committing suicide? And now most people are going to say, of course I would. They will respond according to their native natural intuitions about the value of life. They will not respond according to their philosophy. All right? And this, I'm trying to catch them. I just ask them quickly and they respond. And I said, why? Well, I talk them out because I don't want them to do something stupid. Well, how is it stupid to kill yourself? Well, you're wasting your life. How can you waste a life that has no purpose?
Yes.
What's the purpose? The purpose is existential, right? Whatever we want to make it. Well, this guy wants to kill himself. That's his existential purpose. Why are you getting in his way?
Or he's running out of purpose. So what then? Exactly.
Yeah, well, see, what I'm trying to do is get the atheist to see that he knows better, that there is an answer to this question. There's an answer for why you'd say that, because there is a God who made the world and human beings as special individuals with purpose for their lives. That's an answer.
Yes.
Oh, you don't like it? Okay, you don't like it, but it isn't because there's no answer. This answer makes sense of you, atheist. It makes sense of all kinds of things you believe. Your atheism doesn't make sense of those things.
So the questions are actually there in order to dig out or to probe, or how would you say, the image of God in the person you're speaking to, because there is things that the person already knows and believes that are of God, or of
That's right.
That the person is created to the image of God. And the questions is digging up those nuggets of gold, so to speak.
Yes, that's right. That what you've just described so well, Mats, is the inside-out tactic.
Yeah.
Not every question is going to serve that purpose, but when you're using the inside-out tactic, you're using the questions to dig up those, as you put it, nuggets of gold that are really reflection of God in us, that bear testimony to the truth of the Christian worldview.
One more question, and then I think we have to finish. We're kind of over our time limit.
I'm having such a good time, no problem. But you guys have to go to bed pretty soon, probably. I don't know what time it is there now, but it's
just 8:30. So we're
not bad.
But here's one question: is there any kind of litmus test for knowing when it's just time to leave a discussion? Maybe the person just wants to nail you and is not interested in the truth, or something like that.
Well, I think the simplest litmus test, okay, there's two of them. Now I think about it, and I talk about, I talk about both in one place or another in the book. The first time is really just a social skills capability. Now, some people are not too good at this because, they're on the spectrum or whatever. But if you're paying attention to somebody and they're looking at their watch and they're looking for the door and it's obvious they are no longer interested in what you have to say, then just let that conversation die a natural death. All right? Just let it go. So that's one way. You can see it. People say, leave me alone. This is what all of their body language is saying. All right. There's a different type of critic, though, that Jesus talks about in Matthew chapter 7, I think, in the beginning. Famous passage. It's one of the things in the Bible that virtually everyone thinks is inspired by God, even the atheist. And that verse is, "Judge not." All right, well, Jesus has a lot more to say about judging in that passage than just "judge not." And one of those things entails a judgment. He is at first disqualifying hypocritical judgment. You're looking to pull the speck out of someone else's eye, but you have a log in your own, okay? But then he says, do not throw your pearls before swine, and do not throw what is holy to dogs. Now, it's a figure of speech. I don't think he's dissing people, calling people pigs or dogs. I think he's simply saying there are circumstances that you get into that the people that you're talking with are not going to appreciate the pearls, the wonderful things that you have. Well, then don't give them to them. That's a judgment call in the conversation, which, by the way, is part of the point. There's a judgment there. You are to judge certain things, and there's one. And don't throw what's holy to dogs. Similar concept there, but he then says, lest they trample it underfoot and tear you to pieces. So if you're in a conversation with someone and you feel that the things that you are telling them that are holy and wonderful and good, they are trampling underfoot, and they're ready to turn and tear you to pieces, verbally speaking here, it's time to go. It's time to go. I do talk about that in the steamroller chapter of the book, whatever that clever Swedish word is for that. But in any event, not everyone deserves an answer.
We take one last question. Make it a little. 1.5 hours have gone, but
make it an even number on 90 minutes, huh?
Upon trying the Columbo method, I've sometimes noticed, here's someone who is actually applying what you're teaching.
Okay.
I have sometimes noticed I ask many questions without getting anywhere to advance the other person's thinking. The conversation is not hostile, but it's not getting anywhere, and I run out of ideas for what to...
Well, this is where there are natural limitations to any system, and in this case the limitation is generally going to be the other person. And if the other person is not picking up on your cues, if they are not following your line of thought or your line of questions, and you just end up with nothing, then move on. There is a very important passage in John chapter 10, and I talk about this in the second chapter of the book. And I think this is a verse that's frequently misunderstood, especially by American Christians. I don't know what the state of affairs is in Europe. But Jesus said, "My sheep hear my voice." All right. Now, many Christians think that what Jesus is talking about is a skill that Christians have to kind of tune in to God and hear what God's saying. This is not on Jesus' mind. He's actually employing a figure of speech. And in the text, it says it's a figure of speech in verse 6 or so of John 10 that he's been employing since chapter 5, okay? Hearing God. And the idea of hearing God, in the sense that Jesus means it, even in John 10, is when a non-Christian is influenced in an effective way by the Holy Spirit to turn to Christ. Now, different theologies are going to play the details of that out in different ways. But clearly, my sheep hear my voice. Jesus said, you don't hear my voice because you're not my sheep. The Father hasn't given you to me. Okay? So there are two groups of people you're going to run into. One group that God is working on in a particular way to open their ears to hear the voice of the shepherd and respond. And sometimes that takes a while, right? That's gardening. Another group couldn't care less, right? And they're not going to listen, or they're going to argue and fight, which is what Jesus was encountering in John 10 with the Jewish leadership there. Okay, and so when we are talking with people, we just need to be aware of that. As one of my friends once said, when I was a new Christian, she said, when sometimes you'll notice in a conversation that the sheep lifts its head, right? The person kind of shows a certain interest. And other times they just keep eating grass, is what she said. And if they're eating grass, let them eat. Leave them alone. Leave them alone. If they're not interested, they're not interested. No problem. Okay, move on. The way I put it is, I'm looking for the person who's looking for me. So I'll engage, ask a few questions. If there's no interest that's expressed, then I'm not going to keep going. I'm going to move on to greener pastures, so to speak.
And that relieves us of a lot of pressure, I think.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And it also relieves the non-Christian of pressure from the Christian who wants to keep hammering away on someone who's not interested in listening. Okay. Do you remember Jesus in John 6 when he says, drink my blood, eat my flesh? And a whole bunch of disciples said, oh man, no way. I'm leaving this guy. This is too gross. All right. So Jesus didn't beg them to stay. He let them go. He even thought, what about you, disciples? Are you going to go? And Peter says, well, we don't like what you said any better than anybody, but you're the ones who has the word of eternal life. So we know you're the guy, even though we don't understand everything you say. And so notice Jesus let people do what they wanted to do. If they want to leave, they can leave. If they want to stay, they can stay. Paul says in Colossians 4, verse 5 and 6, he says, conduct yourself with wisdom towards outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. So first he says to be smart. Then he says, let your speech always be with grace. All right, so be nice. Be smart, be nice. Yeah. Then he says, so that you know how to respond to each person. So be smart, be nice, but be tactical. Take the individual into consideration. And the best way to take the individual into consideration is to probe the individual's thinking with questions, showing an interest in their ideas and the reasons for their ideas. And that's how you get started in the tactical game plan.
Wonderful, wonderful. This has been a great delight. Thank you, Greg. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for all your enthusiasm. And I when I look at these comments, people just appreciate you and what you're doing so much. Stand to reason, check it out. You have your website, you have a lot of programs and interesting stuff.
The website address, remember the organization is Stand to Reason, STR.org. Easy. STR.org. Even philosophy students can figure that out.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Greg. It's been great fun to just listen to you and to...
Oh, thank you.